All right, so today we're going to really look closely at a case that I think shows just how complicated things are getting when it comes to what you do online and the consequences you might face in the real world.
Yeah.
We're talking about Martin Oey.
Right.
He's someone who's been in the news quite a bit.
Yeah.
And one thing that's really interesting is that he seems to be staying out of the UK.
Okay.
And that gets us to our main question for this deep dive.
All right.
Could it be because of the UK's Online Safety Bill and National Security Act?
Ooh, that's a really interesting question.
Yeah.
And it's certainly possible, especially when you consider all the things Martin's been accused of, spreading misinformation, inciting harassment, maybe even breaking those UK laws you just mentioned.
Right.
And all while saying he supports British values, but living somewhere else entirely.
Yeah, it's a really strange situation.
It is, yeah.
So maybe we should start by breaking down the Online Safety Bill.
Okay. Sounds good.
I know it's supposed to make the internet a safer place.
Right.
But how could it apply to someone like Martin, who's mainly active online?
Well, the thing is, the bill covers a lot of ground.
Okay.
It doesn't just focus on things that are straight up illegal, like terrorism or child exploitation.
Right.
It also goes after things like hate speech, misinformation, and cyberbullying, which can be hard to pin down.
Yeah, for sure.
But they can still do a lot of damage.
So you're saying even if Martin isn't posting something that's against the law, the way he says things, his rhetoric could still get him in trouble.
Exactly. And it's not just about what he posts himself either.
Okay.
The bill puts a lot of pressure on platforms like YouTube and Facebook to stop this kind of harmful content before it even gets out there.
So they have to be more proactive.
Yeah, and they could get hit with huge fines.
It's huge. Like, how much are we talking?
We're talking millions of pounds if they don't take down problematic posts quickly or even whole accounts.
So let me get this straight.
Yeah.
If YouTube thinks Martin's channel is a risk, they could just shut it down to avoid a fine.
Yeah, they could.
That's a lot of power for these companies.
It is a lot of power. And it creates this weird situation
so?
where these platforms are basically becoming the ones who enforce the law. They have to decide what's harmful and what's not. Which isn't always easy.
Definitely not.
And this brings up questions about censorship and free speech.
Yeah, of course.
The bill tries to deal with these issues.
I bet it's not simple, though.
No, it's a tough balance to strike.
It really makes you think about the responsibility that comes with having a big platform and reaching a lot of people.
Absolutely.
But let's switch gears for a second.
Sure.
What about the National Security Act?
Okay.
That seems more focused on, like, national security threats? So how does that connect to Martin's case?
So the National Security Act is mainly about things like espionage, terrorism, and foreign interference.
Right.
But here's where it gets interesting with Martin.
Okay, I'm listening.
He's accused of encouraging people to boycott the Hong Kong District Council election. And there's an ICK warrant out for his arrest.
Wow. Okay. So even though he's talking about what's happening in another country, the UK could see that as a threat to its own stability or interests.
They could.
Especially if it looks like some foreign power is behind it.
Exactly.
That's where things get really complicated legally, right?
Oh, yeah.
How do you prove what someone's intentions were? And how do you define foreign interference when we're talking about online speech?
Those are tough questions.
Yeah, they are.
And in the end, it'll be up to the courts to figure those out.
It sounds like we're in uncharted territory here.
Kind of feels that way.
Legally speaking.
It does.
We've talked about these laws in general terms.
Right.
But let's get into the specifics of Martin's case.
Okay.
What are the actual accusations against him? And how do they potentially tie into these laws?
That's a good question. There's a lot to unpack here.
Okay, lay it on me.
Well, for starters, he's accused of spreading misinformation and conspiracy theories about Hong Kong.
Right.
Which could fall under the harmful content part of the Online Safety Bill.
I see. But wouldn't that depend on what exactly he was spreading?
Oh, for sure.
I mean, there's a difference between sharing an opinion and deliberately putting out false information.
Exactly. And that's where the wording of the bill gets really specific.
How so?
It focuses on content that's likely to cause serious harm.
So it's not just about whether something is true or not.
Right.
It's also about why someone is sharing it and what might happen because of it.
Exactly.
Okay, so in Martin's case, they'd have to prove he knew the information was false and that he was sharing it with the intention of causing harm.
That's one way to look at it, yeah. And there's some evidence that might back that up.
Like what?
Like when he said that Hong Kong will be locked up and told people to move their money out of the country.
That's pretty strong stuff.
It is.
Especially if people actually took his advice.
Yeah. Those statements could be seen as deliberately trying to scare people.
Yeah.
Which could have real consequences.
Right. Like financial problems or even social unrest.
Exactly.
It does seem like he's playing on people's fears about the situation in Hong Kong.
Yeah.
But what about the accusation of inciting harassment?
Right.
How does that fit in with these laws?
Well, that's where the Online Safety Bill and the National Security Act kind of overlap.
Okay.
So you've got the Online Safety Bill, which is all about protecting people from online abuse.
Right. Things like threats and harassment.
Exactly.
And then you have the National Security Act.
Right.
Which is more about protecting the UK's democratic values.
And its stability.
So inciting harassment could be seen as both a threat to individual safety and a threat to broader societal values.
Right.
It's hitting on both levels.
Exactly. And with Martin, it's not just theoretical.
What do you mean?
There are actual examples of him allegedly inciting harassment.
Like what?
Well, there's the story of that customer who asked for a refund on a mask.
Okay, I remember that.
And then had all their personal information shared online.
That's awful.
It is. Yeah, that's called doxing.
Doxing.
Yeah, it's when someone shares your personal info online to hurt you.
That's scary.
It can be.
And then there's the way he uses the term hot dogs to talk about his opponents.
Right. It's dehumanizing language,
Yeah.
which is often a sign that more serious violence or harassment could follow.
It's like he's setting the stage for something worse to happen.
Exactly.
And don't forget how he went after Lao Qing.
Right. The lecturer at the Chinese University of Hong Kong.
Yeah, he accused Lao Qing's wife of being a Hong Kong police officer.
It seemed like he didn't have any evidence to back that up.
That's a serious accusation to make without any proof.
It is, and it's a tactic that's often used to intimidate and silence people.
By putting them and their families at risk.
Exactly.
It seems like he's trying to create a climate of fear and hostility.
Yeah.
Both toward individuals and toward entire groups he doesn't agree with.
I think that's a fair assessment.
Okay, but what about the British values angle?
Right.
How does that play into all this?
Well, it's a key point.
Okay.
To be a British citizen, especially if you're living outside the UK,
right.
There's an expectation that you'll uphold certain values.
Like what kinds of values?
Things like democracy,
okay,
the rule of law, individual liberty, mutual respect and tolerance for people with different faiths and beliefs.
So if Martin's actions are seen as going against those values,
right,
even if they're not technically illegal,
yeah,
could that be a reason to revoke his citizenship?
It's possible, but it's a really tricky issue.
How so?
There's a lot of debate about when and how citizenship can be taken away. It's usually seen as a last resort.
So it's not something they do lightly.
Exactly.
But in Martin's case, the fact that he lives outside the UK,
right,
while allegedly doing things that contradict British values,
yeah,
that could strengthen the argument for revocation.
It could.
It's like he wants the benefits of being a British citizen,
right,
without actually upholding the values that come with it.
That's one way to interpret it.
It makes you wonder what it really means to be a citizen in today's world.
Yeah.
I mean, with the internet, borders seem less important.
They do.
So can you really hold someone accountable for violating British values if they're not even living in Britain?
That's a great question, and I think it gets to the heart of the matter.
Yeah.
We have these legal systems and social agreements that were created for a world where location was everything.
Right. If you were in a certain place, you were subject to the laws of that place.
Exactly.
But the internet has changed all that.
It really has.
Martin's case shows how technology is forcing us to rethink what it means to be a citizen.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And what responsibility comes with that.
There's a whole new ballgame.
But there's another part of Martin's case we haven't talked about yet.
Oh, right.
The whole thing with him selling masks during the pandemic?
Yeah.
That seems pretty shady to me.
It does raise some ethical questions.
Yeah.
Especially using a platform that's supposed to be about political commentary.
Right.
To make money for yourself.
Especially during a global health crisis.
Exactly.
And then there's the doxing of that customer who complained about the masks.
Right.
It's like he's using his influence to shut people up.
Yeah.
Anyone who dares to criticize him.
Which, again, could be seen as going against those British values of fairness, respect.
And the rule of law.
Exactly.
It paints a picture of someone who's willing to abuse their power and hurt people just to benefit themselves.
It's not a good look.
So we've got all these accusations against Martin.
We do.
And they're all tangled up with these two laws.
And then there's this whole question of British values hanging over everything.
It's a lot to unravel.
It really is.
But I think if we break it down piece by piece,
okay,
and then look at how the pieces connect, we can start to make sense of it all.
I hope so, because it's a complicated case.
It is, but I think it highlights something really important.
What's that?
The lines between the online world and the offline world are becoming increasingly blurry.
You mean what you do online can have real consequences in the real world?
Exactly, and those consequences can reach beyond national borders.
It's like the internet is becoming more and more a part of our everyday lives.
Absolutely.
And the laws and values that govern our societies are having trouble keeping up.
It's a constant game of catch-up.
And Martin's case is a perfect example of that struggle.
It is.
It's a story that's still developing.
Yeah.
And it'll be interesting to see how it all plays out.
Yeah, it feels like we're seeing this clash between how we used to think about citizenship
and what it means in a digital world where borders don't seem to matter as much.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, can you really say someone's violating British values if they're not even living in Britain?
That's the big question, isn't it?
It is.
We have all these legal systems and social contracts that were built for a world where your location determined everything.
Right, right.
But the internet has changed all that.
It really has.
Martin's case is a perfect example of how technology is making us rethink our whole understanding of citizenship and responsibility.
So how do we deal with these seemingly contradictory ideas?
It's tough.
On the one hand, we want to protect free speech.
Yeah.
We want people to be able to express themselves freely no matter where they live.
Absolutely.
But on the other hand, we can't just ignore harmful behavior.
Right.
Just because it's coming from outside our borders.
Exactly. It's a tough balance to strike.
So how do we find that balance?
Well, I think part of it is recognizing that actions online have real-world consequences. And those consequences don't stop at national borders.
So it doesn't matter where you are physically.
Right.
If you're doing something harmful online, there should be a way to hold you accountable.
Exactly.
That makes
Whether it's inciting violence, spreading misinformation, or anything else that harms individuals or society.
We need to find a way to address that.
We do.
But how do we actually do that in a way that's fair?
Yeah.
And doesn't stifle legitimate expression?
That's the tricky part.
It is.
It'll take a multi-pronged approach, I think.
Like what?
Well, we need international cooperation on legal frameworks.
Okay.
Platforms need to take more responsibility for what's happening on their sites.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe most importantly, we need individuals to develop a stronger sense of digital citizenship.
Digital citizenship.
Yeah, it's about realizing that the same rules of respect and responsibility that apply in the real world also apply online.
So it's about being mindful of how our words and actions affect others.
Exactly, even when we're just interacting through a screen.
It's like the internet is an extension of ourselves.
It is.
It's not some separate reality where the rules don't apply.
And it's a space where our choices have real consequences.
So it's not just about governments and platforms cracking down on bad behavior.
Right.
It's also about each of us taking responsibility for what we do online.
Absolutely.
And helping to create a more positive and responsible digital culture.
Exactly.
That's a big challenge.
It is.
It takes education, critical thinking, and a willingness to have real conversations, even when we disagree.
And it means recognizing that freedom of speech comes with responsibilities.
Right.
And those responsibilities don't disappear just because you're online.
It's like we're all trying to figure this out together.
Yeah.
How to build a digital world that reflects our values and protects our rights.
It's a work in progress.
Definitely.
And Martin's case is a good reminder of why all this is so important.
Yeah, it's a cautionary tale. But it's also an opportunity to learn and grow.
Absolutely.
To have a conversation about the kind of online world we want to create. One that's free and safe, vibrant and respectful.
I like that.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the main message for our listeners?
Let me think.
What should they keep in mind as they navigate this digital world that's always changing?
Well, I think the most important thing to remember is this.
Okay.
The internet is not some other reality. It's a part of who we are.
Right.
And what we do online has real-world consequences.
It does.
So it's up to each of us to think about those consequences.
Right.
To be responsible digital citizens.
And to help shape the kind of online world we want to live in.
Exactly.
That's a powerful message.
It's a hopeful one, too, I think.
Yeah, I think so, too. Well, on that note, we'll leave you to think about these questions.
Okay.
And to keep exploring this amazing digital age we live in.
It's not good.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.